This is a reading of a set of lectures by Rudolf Steiner entitled Bees, December 5th, 1923. It is truly remarkable that people know only of the domesticated bee and have no idea what conditions were like when these bees were found in a wild, natural state, entirely exposed to the forces of nature. There is no way, based on the current situation with the artificial methods used in feeding and breeding bees, to predict what the significance of these procedures will mean for the future, 50 or 60 years, or even a century from now. Today it is impossible to object in any way to the artificial methods applied in beekeeping. This is because we live in social conditions that do not allow anything else to be done. Nevertheless, it is important to gain this insight that it is one matter if you let nature take its course and only help to steer it in the right direction when necessary. It is entirely another matter if you apply artificial methods to speed things along. It is quite correct that we can't determine these matters today. It will have to be delayed until a later time. Let's talk to each other again in 100 years. Then we'll see what kind of opinion you'll have at that point.
And we'll go ahead and kind of position it properly. Okay. And insert this down into the queen here. And then what we do is we just go ahead and squeeze the semen into the queen until she's got the full load in there.
Mel, I just can't thank you enough for showing us what you've showed us. Right here is the future of beekeeping all over the world. Artificial insemination is what's going to breed the super bees in the years to come. We're going to be able to deal with the varroa disease. I hope we're going to be able to deal with the tracheal mites. We're going to be able to deal with all the problems that we face because of artificial insemination.
Artificial insemination.
The bees were all gone.
They're gone.
I mean, where'd they go?
Don't know.
The bees are vanishing due to something called colony collapse disorder.
CCD has killed millions of bees worldwide and around half of the 2.5 million colonies in the United States.
This is very serious. And, you know, 1/3 of our what we eat depends on the honeybee and other pollinators for pollination.
Oh, it's been found in about 25 states. This is a national issue.
Overnight, almost, there's vacant. There's no, I don't know what happened to the bees, they're just gone.
And you think it's because of CCD?
I think it's because of CCD.
What's causing all this? What is causing the bees to vanish?
Autopsies of bees remaining in the collapsed hives have confirmed what scientists have long suspected, that honeybees in general are not in good health.
With the U.S. Agriculture Department point to bugs called varroa mites. They kill bees by transmitting viruses. Jerry Turner runs a honey farm near Orlando, Florida. He says the mites have become resistant to the insecticides used to kill them.
Their systems have been weakened by mites and other parasites, by poor nutrition, and exposure to pesticides. And scientists at Columbia University have detected the presence of a virus that seems to be prevalent in the collapsed hives.
I think the problem is complicated. I don't think it's going to come down to a single factor, that we're not going to be able to pin all of these losses on either one factor or even maybe one combination of factors.
We know we've had viruses for years, but all of a sudden something has made everything kind of go haywire.
Nice to have all this equipment here. If you want to do stuff, you don't have to bugger around when you've got equipment.
Trade Union Federation COSATU says Trevor Manuel should trade in his new wheels for something more reasonable. The Union Federation's Patrick Craven has lambasted the planning minister in the presidency for splurging on a luxury motor vehicle while the rest of the country is being urged to tighten its belt. COSATU's Patrick Craven says ministers do not need expensive vehicles to do their job. He recommends all ministers get rid of their expensive wheels.
There we go. Morning. No manners, eh? No manners. Maybe he's worried about my bees. I'm hoping to do 35 today, or 36. And we've got a beautiful swarm. We're very lucky to be able to catch bees so easily, because our bees aren't sick like the rest of the world's bees, where they have to keep them alive with chemicals and things like that. So these are like gifts from God, huh? God's saying Africans did a good job. You didn't fuck up your bee population. I mean, we just have such a lot of swarms. Well, it's basically a sign of healthy bees, isn't it? If they're swarming, that means they're healthy. They're healthy and they're reproducing. Let's go. I will be getting some blowblom honey this year, I know it. Yeah! Very exciting. Let's go! Chickens Road. 3 so far, let's go. Hard work. Hot work. Summer work. Most of it is. Honey production is summertime. Lots of driving. Trying to find bee sites, and visiting your bees normally entails a lot of driving. Bit difficult to find bee sites. So before you start with bees, you need to see if you can find a place to keep bees. It's healthy. Very heavy. Oh, not very nice. Ouch. I think the most dangerous part about beekeeping is the driving that we do here. Don't sting me. Hey, no. Don't do it. Don't do it. Just carry on with your stuff. Leave me. Nice healthy swarm, this, I think. Nice and healthy. Ah, shit. Sick. I think AFB. AFB. That's not good. Shit. I just need to burn this whole fucking box. Just be rid of the problem. 1 AFB. Marked for termination. Right. I think we're looking at about 30% in total of my bees were taken out by AFB. 30% over April, over about a 5-month period. Evidence is pointing out that the wild population isn't infected yet. We'll have to see what happens in another year or two. Nice swarm. Sort of 6-7 frames of bees. Very nice.
On a summer's day in the month of May, a burly little bum come a-hiking down a shady lane through the sugar cane, a-looking for his liking. As he strolled along, he sang a song of a land of milk and honey, where a bum can stay for many a long day and not need any money. Oh, the buzzing of the bees and the cigarette trees, the soda water fountain, where the lemonade springs and the bluebird sings in the big rock candy mountain.
Enjoy your honey. Hi. That's gingered honey. Fembos.
This is melted flambeau.
Yeah, that's raw mountain flambeau.
You have a mountain flower in the big jar.
Then I'm going to give you the mountain flower. Yeah. That one we harvested on Thursday. It's 2 days hot.
Wonderful. I'm sure we'll enjoy that. Thank you very much. Thank you.
Enjoy your honey.
Yes, enjoy your day.
Thank you. Raw mountain flower honey.
You know that the bees have a virus of illness now?
Yeah.
The bees have a virus.
How's the bees doing?
The bees are doing fine.
Are they sorting that out?
Yeah, we are sorting it out.
Is the disease kind of getting worse, or is it?
No, that's why at the moment the people are out. There are 25 people who have been chosen to bring samples.
Over the past couple of weeks, the dangerous American Foulbrood disease that is threatening South African bee colonies was widely reported in the media. If the disease is not controlled effectively, it could have serious repercussions, not only for the bee industry, but also for crops that are dependent on pollination.
How serious is this problem, John?
Yeah, look, it's a very serious problem. I mean, it's a disease we've never had before. It's come in, it shouldn't have come in, but it has, it's arrived. And South Africa has been American Foulbrood free for forever. And it has now been definitely identified, in the southern tip of the Western Cape. And it is, of course, arising all sorts of concerns amongst beekeepers and fruit growers who depend on bees for their pollination. Yeah.
We're getting a sense that hives have to be destroyed, that if someone reports that, okay, well, I've got bees in my hive and they find something, then the whole hive has to go. It has to be destroyed. You can't move it somewhere or anything.
Yeah, well, the spores are very contagious and they move in honey and on bees. And the most drastic treatment is to destroy the colony and make sure that the spores are killed with it.
Don't talk to me about frogs and conserving gorillas and this and that. Conservation is about one thing. Conserve humans. If you can conserve, mean keep down the numbers of humans, all the rest will naturally fall into place. All the rest just naturally will work. Our beekeeping in South Africa looks very much like beekeeping in the rest of the Western world, and that is aging. Beekeeping has become increasingly marginalized, increasingly a marginal business. There are 50% fewer beekeepers now than there were in 1950. And the number of colonies are going down as well, but particularly the amount of beekeepers. It just is more difficult and more expensive to keep bees, more difficult to find places to keep them. The average age of beekeepers in South Africa will be well above 50, but probably close to 60. And that's not dissimilar to the situation in many other parts of the world. Go to any beekeeper gathering here, you don't find a lot of young guys. In South Africa, predominantly white. There's been a lot of beekeeping developments to transform the industry. Some of that has worked, most of it hasn't. Rian, it's Mike. No, it's no problem at all. I just phoned to ask how it's going, if there's anything you need of me. Otherwise, I was planning to come across tomorrow morning quite early, if you're going to be there. Yeah, I've been beekeeping today. I did 3 hours beekeeping today. So if you're going to be there tomorrow morning, I'll come across and spend a bit of time with the data sheets. As I said all along, if we get by with 50% of workable days, then we're lucky. Thank you, Rian. Thanks, bye. Right at the end of 2008, a beekeeper by the name of Anthony Giselman, who I'd never heard of before, one of the unregistered beekeepers, a relatively small hobbyist beekeeper, about 180 colonies in central Cape Town. He phoned me up just before Christmas to say his bees were sick and he thought he had foulbrood in his colonies. So I said, fine, bring me some frames of brood for me to look at. He brought me frames of brood. This is about the 12th of January 2009, and we sent them up to my colleague in Pretoria, who's been doing all the AFB analysis for us. She analyzed those samples and they came back as AFB positive. What did it mean at that time? I'll be honest with you, I thought this was just an aberration, something strange, who knows, maybe a bottle of honey that had come in, just this, probably nothing to worry about, because as I say, I'd always been of the opinion that AFB was not a threat to Africa. At that stage I thought, well, maybe it's just one colony or a couple of colonies particularly susceptible. I then went with Anthony to visit his apiary sites. This clearly was not colonies that were just actually seeing a small amount of AFB. This was whole apiary sites that were actually collapsing.
Whatever the proposed control, whether it's legislation, whether it's beekeepers doing it themselves, we have to find out somehow where it came from, so that in the future we should be able to prevent this from happening again. And the beekeepers that do have it seem to all have a common area in the Western Cape, which is the Wingfield Air Force Base, and where it's gone from here is anybody's guess. So containment technically would mean a lot more work will have to get done on a diagram like this to try and find out which beekeeper moved which bees where and which beekeeper sold what equipment to who. And if we're talking about 3-4 years ago when Peter sold these bees, then that would be quite a serious bowl of spaghetti. Colony collapse disorder was a huge scare. Now, colony collapse disorder has not been blamed on any specific organism at this stage. There's no sort of specific virus or specific bacteria that can be identified or can be linked in any way to CCD. So the beekeepers are responsible for stressing the colonies to a large extent because of their constant medication of colonies of bees. Now in Africa we don't have that. In Africa to date we have had very, very little disease. And those disease aspects that we've had in the country, and we can name Varroa, which is a specific little mite that lives in beehives, and we can talk about the tracheal mite, we can talk about European Foulbrood. Our honeybees in South Africa have to a large extent been able to counter those by virtue of the fact that she has never been manipulated. Dames en heren, baie dankie vir die geleentheid dat ek julle kan kom toespreek. Ek is Robert Post. Ek is voorsitter van die Wes-Kaapse Bijenbedryfsvereniging. My CV is 'n bietjie lank om nou hier uit te pak, so ons gaan nie dit doen nie. Maar ons het van dat hierdie siekte in Suid-Afrika gediagnoseer is, het ek onmiddellik baie werk begin doen sodat ek vir ons bijenboere op die grond kan probeer help hiermee. Hierdie is gebaseer op soort van dit wat ons weet. Dit gee ons vir julle vir wat dit werd is. Dis heeltemal 'n nuwe ding en dis nie maklik altyd om veranderingsbestuur in jou eie lewe toe te pas nie. Ek meen ons lewe ons almal al jare en jare saam met 'n ding. So dis nie maklik dat ons sommer net sê ons draai nie. Nog harder. Goed. Ons is die eerste land wat hom het in 150 jaar. Die res het hom almal al gehad. Dis die ernstigste en ergste bijensiekte wat daar bestaan. Die een met die grootste impak, ekonomiese impak op die bijenboer. Nou hierdie ding werk met spore. Dit beteken is amper soos 'n saadjie. Julle is almal seker in die landbou, maar hy werk soos 'n saadjie. Daai saadjie is geweldig hardskalig. Hy kan leef 160 grade Celsius. Na 10 minute leef hy nog. Party van hulle. Hy kan droog lê vir 60 jaar. En asseblief, ek weet baie mense in die landbou glo baie maklik om 'n ding dood te dous. Skiet hom met 'n pil of 'n so 'n ding. Daar is nie so iets vir hierdie siekte nie. Wat belangrik is dat ons nou moet leer om te inspekteer. Dit is hoekom hierdie inspekteertjies rondhardloop. Nou ja, dames en here, dis nou miskien die tyd dat ons aan ons broeikaste begin werk. Ek sou myself verstout om te sê ons het genoeg bewys om te beweer dat hierdie siekte is reeds meer as 3 jaar by ons. Ons sien nou eers die simptome. Ons maak een aanname en daai aanname is, dames en here, of ons het hom almal of ons gaan hom een van die dae almal kry. Jy gaan nie kan wegkruip van hierdie siekte nie. Ek is jammer, ons het hom almal kry. In Amerika het almal hom, in Australië het almal hom. Dit is net 'n kwessie van hoe gaan jy hom hanteer en hoe gaan jou bijen hom hanteer.
The picture's really bad. I hope we didn't record it so bad.
What's this reception over?
Well, you can't work with it though. JD, you're not going to talk now, okay, baby?
Bees give us delicious honey and the added value of honeycomb wax and its myriad of healthy uses. You may very well say that bees are the buzz.
Lying at the foot of the Muizenberg Mountains, the Oude Robkraal estate was first established by Brendan Ashley Cooper's grandfather. 70 years on, his grandson has turned the property into one of the names in quality honey and hive products. The heart of an operation with 900 hives across the Boerland, you need to approach with a cautious interest.
This is such a gorgeous location. What makes it ideal for honey farming?
Bee farmers look for food for their bees. So in the summertime we're looking for eucalyptus trees, which we have plenty of around here, and we look for places that are warm and where there's not a lot of activity because bees sting.
If you're intent on not minding your own beeswax, you'd better kit up well. Brendan's locations can each host from 12 to 26 hives, depending on how rich the bees' food source is in the area.
When I was a child, I grew up with bees, and in 1994 I ended up in Israel with a bee farmer for a year and a half. And that is where it all started. What is it? As you know that they're out. As you know that they're out. Fantastic. Sunshine closed, finished, out. Okay. Good, Ben. What's up? Not a problem. I will check with him this morning. I'm going to drive past the first thing and I'll go and ask him, okay? Okay, fast around your plate.
Okay, sauce and bake. I got fast.
What sound does it make when it goes fast?
I got fast.
Very fast sound. My grandfather was a yacht designer and a boat builder and a master carpenter, and so this is left from him. This was an old cow milking shed, if you see the old troughs on the sides. Quite nice. But the roof is pretty hammered, and there's various reasons why it hasn't been repaired yet, or excuses. I just have a bag here and you can just pop it in the bag. So what I normally do is I put a whole pile of them here, and I just find that hole.
Any side of this?
Any side, as long as you get all 4 of them in. That's it. Nice and easy. It's a standard Langstroth hive, and it should have my registration number because by law all beekeepers have to be registered in South Africa. It's a great way of marking your equipment, so if people steal it, it's really difficult to cover that up. You know it's stolen equipment if there's a big patch there that has been sanded through.
In South Africa, with our bee, who has never been selected for, who has never had any breeding programs applied to her, and with our poor, nectar-poor environment, we produce perhaps 25 kilograms a hive per year, which is sort of a tenth of what it takes to be a really viable economic enterprise. Where's the troffeltjies and stuff? Give us a moment. This is. Just put in the bucket at the bottom there. Business aspects such as break-even play a big role because it is such a low-income activity. You need quite a wad of beehives to be able to produce sufficient product or sufficient services to make it worth your while. It is basically a lot more than just an economic activity. It is more a culture of beekeeping.
Very unsophisticated. It's just a tank full of wax, basically. That's boiling with an element inside it. And we just buy the wax, fill it up. What we're doing is we put the boxes in here for 15 minutes, and because it's so hot, it blows all the air out of the wood, and then it starts to suck the wax in as the air comes out, and that gives our equipment 15 to 20 years. If the guys don't do that, they get 3, 4, if they're lucky, 5 years out of it, and then it's in the wood's history. Thereafter, I'm sending this equipment off to be sterilized for AFB, so it's going to be irradiated. If this tank was hot, if it was 160 degrees, we could do it for 15 minutes and that would kill any AFB spores. Because the spores seem to get trapped in the propolis and any other little bits of bee product in there. And poor David has this job of doing the dipping. It's not a pleasant job, but it certainly helps the beehives a bit.
Beekeeping in the Western Cape is also very intense in that it's in a very, very small geographical region, and you have lots and lots of honeybees that are required for pollination, and therefore the nectar sources are not sufficient. This means that honey in South Africa is actually always in short supply because we do not produce enough by any means for our own population, and therefore South Africa has really never been a major exporting country of honey. And this has meant that since the 1970s we've been importing honey. New laws were promulgated in the 1980s, the early 1980s, to prevent any diseases coming in along with that honey. Specifically that all honey that comes into the country is radioized with a radioactive source. Our local honey isn't subject to that requirement. Yeah, but what are you doing in front of the lens? This was at the bottom. Beekeeping is much a thing that is done by an individual as a passion. It is not because it is a sort of normal standard occupation or a normal standard activity. It is a fairly esoteric and sometimes fringe activity. People have a backyard outlook, if I can use that term, on beekeeping because it's still done as a very low-tech activity. It just makes it a lot easier to handle that thing.
You know what's quite nice about these things, if you use screws, is when somebody vandalizes your box or if a badger takes it out, you just whip off the panel and you put a new panel on. So you can reuse a lot of the panels depending on how fraught they are. Yeah? Cool. Should we go and have a look at the bees? I'm just having a quick look, just out of curiosity while I'm thinking about it. Let's see. Alright, looks alright. Oh, no. What is this? See these little cappings here? Here's AFB. Let's take this colony away today. Look here. Here we go. AFB. It looks healthy, but it's not. These little perforated cappings here. AFB, apparently one of those cells has 500 million spores in it, if not more. It's been a real educational, this disease. You start to look properly at the brood. Here's the queen. Shame. It's cold out here. How can you open this on such a cold day? Can you see her? Put me back. That little bee is emerging out of its cell. It's eating the cocoon capping off here, and here it's coming out. Or trying to come out. It needs to nibble a bit more away there. There's a young bee, look there. Can you see it's quite weak? It's almost like a newborn lamb or something. Almost like whitey and pale. Yeah, it looks very good. What happens with this disease is that the little egg, you actually can see the eggs here. As soon as it hatches from the egg, they start to feed it. And the honey carries the spores, so they feed the larva the honey, and that's how the disease gets into it. So those first 3 days they're susceptible to the AFB, and they carry on growing, but the spores germinate, and by the time they go into their cocoon, they're so infected that they just collapse. There's that horrible thing. There we go. That's a common sign of the AFB. Damn! Disappointed, man. I thought that these colonies were slightly tolerant. I mean, there's nothing special about them. I just thought that they would genetically have some sort of tolerance. And we will be killing them, unfortunately, now. And my statistics go up from 12% to 15% as we find more and more. You don't want to use chemicals. You'd rather let these bees die and try and have some sort of natural selection where even if it's 20% of the hives left, to have them that you can breed from, that are tolerant to this disease, because this disease is here to stay, in my opinion. We're not going to eradicate it, even if Department of Agriculture thinks that there's a slight chance of it. I don't think so. It's too late. It's everywhere.
So is mead actually more of a liqueur or wine, or how would you think you?
Your simplest classification of alcohol is to classify it based on what it's fermented from. So mead is fermented honey, wine is fermented fruit, and beer is fermented grain. If any of those are distilled, then you get a spirit. So the simple answer to that would be that the category that mead falls into is mead. But because a lot of people don't know what mead is, they call it honey wine in the States just to make it easier for people to understand that this is wine made from honey. But actually, the reality is, seeing that mead came first, wine is actually mead made from grapes. It's just people have forgotten what mead is. The thing about bees is that they go to flowers, and flowers are a fantastic source of yeast. So there's actually always yeast sitting in honey, unless you've got modern honey which has been cooked or baked or something. But basically all your old wild honey will have lots of yeast in it. So if you just add water to it, it turns naturally into alcohol. If you use a lot of honey, you'll end up with a sweet mead like this one that I got in Slovakia, which is a very sweet mead. It's about 40% honey to make this product. So even after your alcoholic fermentation has turned a lot of that sugar into alcohol, it'll still be sweet when you're finished. Whereas this mead here, which is a Hawaiian mead, it's made from macadamia nut honey, and you can see it's a completely different color. This is a much drier mead. It's hardly sweet at all. It's like a Chardonnay wine. So when you drink it, you can drink quite a bit of it. These 4 bottles here are some of the products that we produce. One with rooibos tea and various herbs in it. We've got one with chili in it. We're definitely the first commercial mead in South Africa. We're also the first mead produced with our technology in the world. And we have a couple of other meaderies that we've set up around the world that are using the technology. I've got one that I set up last year in Chile. 2 years ago I set up one in Portland, Maine. And there's one in the Piketberg. And we now produce and export mead around the world. But what that's done is it's created a demand for honey. So we have therefore created a demand for beekeepers. And so what my business partner Sindiswa does is she trains beekeepers on how to produce honey so that we can buy the honey from them and use it to make our mead. So we have a sort of sustainable type of approach to what we're doing.
I'm Richard Nzwana. I'm living here in Grahamstown. I'm working about the blind people. I'm a breed instructor and also beekeeping. This year I'm doing a course, the second course for a beekeeper. I'm wishing to doing about a wax is to start to create the candles, to make candles and lip care, especially for the ladies, and also polish, the floor polish. Yeah, bees is not instinct to me because I'm a gentle and I touch gentle. Who's the players? Who's okay?
No, ungaqhabuli kufuphi ke uqhawule kudala.
Kudala ne?
Yeah.
Mhlambe kulomgama.
Likhulu kaloku ke lo icingo. Qhawula ke.
When you are working about bees, you don't be scared and also don't be panicking, because the bees, when it's moving around your face, don't shake your hands, because the bees think that you start to fight, then it's going to attack you immediately. At least it's 3 years now I'm working about bees. It's never sting to me.
All honey that comes into South Africa gets offloaded from either the ship or the truck that it comes on, and it then gets taken to the one of 2 or 3 irradiation facilities in the country where it gets irradiated. Now before it gets irradiated, it sits outside in a big packing area. Heaps and heaps of honey sit in buckets and drums and all sorts of bags, different things. If there's a little leak on those bags, any bee that comes to steal the honey from the packets or from the leak will basically become infected, because that honey hasn't been irradiated yet. Logically, the way we should have done it is we should have said that all honey should be irradiated prior to its arrival in South Africa, as opposed to honey gets irradiated 2 or 3 weeks after it's arrived here. Every disease that comes in to South Africa is met with a major fanfare, and it's the end of the world as we know it and all these sort of things. So we've had diseases coming in that have caused major problems, and you know, invariably our bees actually seem to muddle along. So we had, in the 80s, there was tracheal mite and nosema that came in, and these were, you know, great disasters that were going to destroy the planet, and our bees recovered. And then after that came varroa mite that was definitely going to destroy all the bees in the country, and the bees just recovered. So you have to have faith in the fact that the predictions have been every single time one of these diseases arrives that this is the end of beekeeping as we know it, and within 2 years beekeeping as we know it seems to return. So the bees have proven us wrong on a number of occasions, and the only thing that I can basically conclude from this is that our bees are a bit craftier than we are.
Beautiful little heathers, stunning, hey? And you'll be amazed how well they do in your garden. Bee forage. Where in the world are we going to have enough plants to feed our bees? Because that is the biggest bee issue at the moment in the world. Not CCD, none of that stuff. But where are we going to get the plants to make sure that our bees have got forage? Not just our bees, but our indigenous pollinators as well. All these little insect and gogoetjies and so on. They're extremely important. Because without the bees and without the pollinators, you don't have biodiversity. You don't have a future generation of plants. Plants are not my hobby horse, but I understand the value that we have as beekeepers in needing to nurture plants. So learn about them, and if you find anything, sort of do something about it.
The fundamental stresses are the loss of forage, the loss of natural forage, the increasing distances that beekeepers have to travel to manage their bees. Every time they move their bees, they stress them. Every time they actually put them on marginal food resources, they stress them. Every time they start feeding them artificial food to keep them alive. And if you look at bee magazines, half of what you see in bee magazines these days, you look at any of the bee magazines, you'll find massive amounts of adverts for bee food. And for this pollen substitutes and this substitute and that substitute. Whenever you're getting to that situation, you are getting to a situation not totally dissimilar to, you know, sort of factory chickens or lot cattle, and those things become very susceptible.
We're far too selfish to operate like bees. We're all just interested in ourselves, where the bees are interested in the survival of the colony. We're just interested in the survival of our little family. So I would say we're more like solitary insects, sort of living together, but yeah, just interested in our own little environment or microclimate around us, where the bees living 10, 20, 30, 40,000 little insects together, and they're not worried about themselves. They're completely selfless the way they work themselves to death. They basically wear their wings out. That is why they die. They die from overworking. I think that beekeepers put stress on the bee colonies in a natural, if you compare them to a natural environment where they're living in a cave or a cavity. But they form such an essential part of the agriculture that it's a necessity almost that they have bees brought in. And for me, I need to make money for my beehives, and it's the way I've chosen to make money, is by using them to pollinate with. And I know it's not very nice for the beehives, so we try our best to put as little stress on them as possible. Yeah, so I don't really think that we're part of the colony. I think we're the colony's worst enemy.
Harold's got that smoker going, and we're going to go into this thing and we're going to shake a package of bees and show you just what it's all about. Let me get right over here with you, Harold, and pull that top up and let's see what we can get into it. Boy, they just roll right down in that funnel, don't they?
Yep, thing's slick now. There you go. You're ready to come to you.
Well, folks, here we've got it. We've got a package of bees. It's ready to go out. It's ready to start somebody on a trip to beekeeping and learning about it.
One of the big problems with your sort of whole Judeo-Christian Islamic approach to nature was the subjugation of nature by man. You know, we are going to control the animals because they were put here for us. And a lot of the animals don't want to be controlled, especially bees. You know, bees are quite happy to work with us, but they will work against us if we basically force them. They'll actually just vanish. The density of bees is nothing close in Europe to what we have in Africa. And of course, all the bees in Europe are bred by man. They're, you know, somebody orders their packet of bees from a queen producer, and there's very limited genetic diversity. Whereas here we have huge numbers of wild beehives, and each one of those beehives is harboring its own special genetic secrets and treasure chest of abilities to deal with different things. So what we run the risk of doing in South Africa is by over-managing AFB, we actually run the risk of just damaging our bees even more.
Basically, not much happening in this area at this time of the year, so we've established a quarantine site. It's basically one of our canola sites that we've just decided to isolate all the infected colonies on the site until the Department of Agriculture decide what they want to do with it. Here we go, 120 odd AFB colonies. You'll see the A mark on the front of the hives. This is how we work in the canola. Big site, 100 hives, 150 hives on the site. Amazing. They get fierce on the canola, the bees. Beekeeping in South Africa will change forever. You can never keep bees the way we used to with this disease, because the equipment carries the disease, and if we transfer the equipment from one hive to the other, we're just going to be putting the disease onto possibly healthy hives and infecting them. So in the old days we used to just take supers or equipment from one hive to the other as we needed to. We can't do that anymore. How's the sound of those blue cranes? They sound prehistoric, don't they? Fire hazard of note in the middle of summer. You need to be really careful. Shall we go down here? There's a few that I've used for some of the TV guys and the Minister of Agriculture, and we just popped some of these hives here to inspect them. That smells quite strong, that colony. Right, so we'll just leave that one like that. But it's quite easy to see. And then you've got a colony like this that says AFB on it, and then you just see lots of bees all defending the entrance. And you wonder why they aren't in the same situation as those ones. And I think it's a genetic... I think there's some sort of tolerance or something that they're still alive. You know what, when I was in Israel, many a time I ran away from the bees there. I'm never going to work with bees again. And I used to swell sometimes. Shit in the head. This is a twitchy hive, eh? You alright?
Yeah.
Did they nail you?
Yeah.
Where? Where?
Yeah.
Ah, oh well. Go put the veil on if you wanna. If there are enough bees here to make it through winter, maybe they will clean out the AFB. I'm a bit confused as to whether to hope there's some tolerance or whether to get rid of these before they spread the disease somehow to any other bees, and you just have this big mushroom effect. Who knows?
Any sensible decision had to be taken before the bees are used for pollination, both because the pollination time will be by far the greatest infection point, because that's when they're all close together, and secondly because you just cannot not use bees during pollination in the Western Cape. So there you're talking you know, perhaps 4 billion rands worth of production and 200,000 jobs. So you couldn't jettison that. And we just don't know where the beekeepers are. While we have regulations in the country that require all beekeepers to be registered, at best 10% of the beekeepers are registered. And there are beekeepers all over the place that are not part of any organized beekeeping, they're not registered, no one knows where their bees are, no one knows if they're a beekeeper or not.
Beekeepers, I think in South Africa, are somewhat embattled. You know, we have a lot of our beehives get stolen, we don't get any help from government really, the police laugh at you if you tell them that you're having problems with your bees being stolen, and so beekeepers tend to be quite defensive. And beekeepers also tend to sort of think that they can solve the problems themselves. So what's going to happen with AFB is that we're going to get some beekeepers who are going to go and put chicken medicine into their beehives. And they're going to do all sorts of funny things. And it's going to give South African honey a bad reputation because we're going to start picking up antibiotic contamination in our honey. We're going to have beekeepers who are going to decide to put all their beehives in a big heap and pour petrol over them and burn them because they think they have AFB. We're going to have a whole range of erratic behavior, and you know, at the end of the day we're going to be hurting our bees quite a bit by being misinformed beekeepers.
Goedemorgen, good morning. Hugh Campbell, please. That's Michael Sop. Hi. Thanks. Hugh. Well, it's not so good. We're finding lots of samples all over the place, and the legislation, the regulations are not in place yet, so it makes life quite difficult. There's still quite a bit of insistence on getting rid of all these clinically infected colonies from the infected sites. So the process will be that the inspectors will go out into the field, they will find clinically infected colonies, they will kill the bees there in the field that evening and wrap them all up in cling wrap and then bring them in, and they will all get stockpiled and they will go for irradiation as rapidly as possible. My personal opinion is that within a couple of weeks we will have so many positive results within the Western Cape area that the whole eradication thing will not be practical anymore, and we will then immediately swap over onto a containment strategy, and eradication will then end. But the beekeepers, not surprisingly, will be resistant to us burning their equipment entirely until compensation deals have been concluded, which they haven't. So this way, at least, the boxes and everything are not being destroyed. Yeah, trying to make the best out of a bad situation.
Oh, you're still young. You don't see that a lot. If you can just please fill in your name, I'll give you a name tag. Your bag, and then you just have to sign with it in there.
One star BA. Yeah, it's a standard size.
So basically what I had to do, what I forced to do, switch it off, let the honey drain.
I'm really humbled by the honor bestowed on me from the Department of Agriculture, Forestry and Fisheries to officially open the 2009 Bee Conference. The surge in trade and the increased movement of people and climate change have resulted in an increase in biosecurity risk. South Africa is a net importer of honey, and this presents a challenge of dealing with imports. Where we accept that we need to import, we also accept that there are increased risks associated with importation. Hence, we need to attend to the subject of honey production in South Africa to feed domestic demand and start eroding our dependence on import.
Davy, please, maak baie seker is almal is nie mis hom. Okay, net hou kop, né?
Biosecurity is not only the responsibility of government. Government will ensure that along the borders, we reduce risks associated with import of products. But what happens on the farms is the responsibility of the farmers.
I've spoken to them on so many occasions, not once, not twice, not 3 times, but like probably 10 times to various people. What we're going to do, what we're going to do, come on, let's do it. Yeah, we are still fucking around. They haven't made up their mind, they're just interested in doing their little inspections. Right, the bees are quite tiny, so we have to try and check all the little holes.
Bear is sick. And Fatum Summer, 2 tablets, gooi in, dan stomach.
Wat gaan die tablets doen?
Maar kom die beer dood.
The government, not the Department of Agriculture, the state allowed this disease into this country, and the state should be taking responsibility for their negligence.
We're talking about the fact that, you know, the way the bee industry is so difficult, because I was told and I asked about, do we have any bee specialists in the country? And I was informed there are very, very few bee specialists, 1 or so, and some other people, particularly those who are dealing with bee diseases.
Fellow beekeepers, it's always wonderful to see old beekeeping friends. American Foulbrood seems to be misnamed since it was first described by Aristotle, which means it wasn't American. The first serious description was by a guy by the name of Chirac in 1769. All Western honeybees, all European honeybees would have had AFB forever. Who knows when they got it, but they have been challenged by this disease since time immemorial. I think our bees have always been really fine because they've not had all these diseases. We now have got the classic camel breaking the straw's back, straw breaking the camel's back, and there are too many challenges, too many stresses, and our bees are suddenly no longer bulletproof.
We still aren't sure of what the spread is, and I'd rather not be seen to be the cause of it spreading any further. I'd like to try and do the right thing to try and protect all the other bees and beekeepers. And
South Africa is the only country that does irradiation. Around the world, the honey is 80% AFB positive. Prior to 1983, South Africa didn't have irradiation. Honey came into South Africa without any restrictions. Never mind honey, bees are brought into Africa without any restrictions. It is inconceivable that AFB has not been brought into Africa thousands of times, continually every day. And yet there's never been AFB in Africa, not once, not ever, not a single report of clinical symptoms. I've always viewed African bees as bulletproof, resistant to AFB, and yet look at what are we seeing. So something's changed. Something's changed. And we don't know what's changed. We're going to have to understand and find out what's changed.
They're basically beehives that have been, the bees have been killed now. They're sealed though with sponge, so all the holes are sealed. So they shouldn't attract anything. Approximately 130. I shall see you shortly. Thank you very much. Bye.
Essentially, if we find it in one apiary site in a beekeeper, sure as damn it, it's in every single site, in time. And of course, beekeepers move around, pollination, they go sit with other beekeepers, they have transit camps, and they just transmit it from one to another. So the spread of it is essentially through beekeepers.
Right, we're going to wrap them and then put them onto a pallet. Okay.
I'm just wondering, why don't we take a slip sheet and put a slip sheet around it and then wrap it?
Around each one?
Okay. Just to cover the extra protection.
Because, look, you could still have a leakage through that. Whereas if you got in a slip sheet like that, then wrap it.
And just cover the top one on each.
I think it's going to work better.
Believer!
Right, like that. Okay, hold him like that. That's a good idea.
Very hard to eliminate once it's in a beekeeping operation. The only way you can do it is keep the threshold down, keep the numbers down. You slowly bleed it out. You have to bring the numbers of spores in your operation down. And the only way to do that is to actually make sure that the moment a colony gets beginning to get sick, beginning to actually become vulnerable in terms of getting robbed out by the others, you then have to eliminate that from your operation. And the only way that you can do that is with regular inspection. You've got to catch it before it gets to that stage, before it starts collapsing, and you have to inspect, inspect, inspect. Likely impact. Maybe just transient. Maybe our bees are resistant. Maybe our bees will recover, no problem. Maybe this is just a bad day, a bad week. Maybe it'll just disappear. No one has ever eradicated AFB. There's no country in the world that has had AFB and doesn't have it anymore. Clinically infected colonies. We now can add 23 to our original 5. And very recently it has popped. We've got one all the way up at Vredendal. We've got some in Oudtshoorn and Uniondale. So we're looking at a big area. Mankind has amped up the dispersal of all the diseases and pests and invasive plants and invasive organisms thousands of times compared to what natural migration rates are. We have systematically spread everything all around the planet in our globalization and increased imports, and most of this in the last 50 years. And to an extent, customs officials and regulators all around the world are fighting a losing battle, keeping things out.
Because if we imagine all these little glass vessels are each a bee, and each of them is full of genetic potential and ability. We infect all of these. They're all different bees, and we infect all of them with AFB. And these bees now have to go through to the next generation. And let's say that bee dies, and that bee dies, and that bee dies. But these ones will all reproduce and go through to the next generation. And some of them will mate with each other and pass the genes around, and the genes will move. And now more AFB will come through, and maybe only that one will be susceptible, but the rest of the population will move through to the next generation. And from here onwards, you would expect after 2 or 3 generations that the bees that survive will have almost no ability to be affected by AFB. Now the other option is if all of these bees get AFB and we kill them, then you've just got nothing.
As we work with genetics, we can approach the problems that face us as beekeepers, and we can all overcome them. So let's hit the road and talk to some of those queen breeders and see what it's all about. Artificial insemination is really the only way. Well, let me ask you about the Midnight line. Where did the Midnight line came from? The Star line is a hybrid Italian. Is the Midnight, what is the Midnight?
Well, originally Bud Kale selected both Carniolan and Caucasian stocks to develop the Midnight bee from. And his main goal in the Midnight was just gentleness. He wasn't too concerned with honey production. He wasn't too concerned with disease resistance, although both those things were important to him. But he wanted a bee that the hobbyist could sort of have in his hive right next to his house, open it up frequently and not get stung. So his goal was really just gentleness in the Midnight, whereas the Starline was more designed for the commercial honey producer to obtain increased volume of honey from his colonies.
so much about understanding any type of animal is about knowing how to communicate with that animal. Without a bee suit you have to use a little bit of smoke, but basically you try and keep as close to that animal as you possibly can, because that gives you a lot more integrity with the animal. You don't have to, you know, if you're all protected up in a bee suit, you can abuse the bees a lot more than if you are without a bee suit. It forces you to listen to what the bees have to tell you, and the bees don't like certain things. They have a definite dislike for being tinkered with. If you're looking at the bees, you can tell a lot about the bees by their color. Normally with the bees you look at the orange stripes here, and you can pick up a lot of variability depending on the genetics of the bees. You see there that's two small orange stripes, that one's one orange stripe. The number of, well, the color varies quite a lot from bee to bee depending on who the drone father and the queen were and that sort of thing. So if humans decide that they want to go with that bee because it has good honey production capacity and they try and breed bees that are all like that, you might find that this other bee over here that's good at making propolis might be, those genes might be lost, and then we would end up with bees that are really good honey producers but not good propolizers. And if we one day decide that propolis is a very good medicine, then we won't have bees to produce that medicine anymore. So by breeding for some traits you destroy other traits.
Effectively what we've done and what beekeeping in Africa does is it puts out boxes, it catches wild bees, it extracts and removes the honey from those colonies while they are prepared to stay with you. And if the bees die or disappear, we just put out new boxes and catch other colonies.
They're a wild species that we look after, just like we sometimes look after buffalo and zebra in a nature reserve. Bees are things that humans coexist with, and I like my bees to be as close to wild bees as possible. I don't like them to be too gentle. They must actually let me know that they don't really want me to take all of their honey. We need to make sure that our bees have respect for what they're supposed to be. They're supposed to be scary animals that can defend themselves and exist despite what humans do.
And that is very different from the rest of the world, where there have been hundreds of years of breeding and change, and the animal that they are dealing with is now very different from the ancestral wild population.
If you were to look at the American mail order beekeeping system, you would place your order with a queen breeder and you'd say, look, I want 3,000 queens, or I want 3,000 1-kilogram packets of bees. And then one of the postal companies, normally UPS in the States, would arrive with a monstrous consignment of bees that would arrive at your apiary, and then you'd just go and dump them all into beehives and you'd keep bees for the year. Now the problem with that is that there were only about 8 or 9 commercial queen breeders, all in the southern states, and they would each have 1 or 2 queens which they used to lay the eggs that they made new queens from, and they had a couple of boxes that they used to produce the drones that would go and mate with those queens. So what happened is, by beekeepers all going and removing the queens that they had in their beehives and replacing them with these mass-produced queens, they suddenly took all the genetic diversity in North America and they wiped it out, and suddenly they just had bees that were the descendants of 8 or 9 queens. Taken all this genetic diversity, and then you've got this little thread of genes that you keep. And that's essentially what modern commercial beekeeping has done in America, is they've taken away the genetic diversity and they've ended up with just a little thin, pathetic thread of DNA which is hanging on to that rich past. And you just need one little pair of scissors and you can snip that thread. Whereas if you look at Africa, we've got this big thick rope, and to cut that you're going to need so many different diseases to cut through that rope and actually eradicate all that genetic diversity. So one of the great things, the big messages which any geneticist can tell you, is that out of diversity comes strength in any population.
This is a virgin queen. It's actually a Russian queen that the USDA brought over from Russia, the breeding stock, and then we got a breeder from them and produced this queen, which we got to inseminate with semen from other Russian drones from Russian stock. Queen has been put to sleep with carbon dioxide, so she's being perfectly still.
If we sit and force bees into the mold, we're not clever enough to work out what mold bees should be fitting into. And the great sadness is that by people assuming this approach that humans know better, we actually have this potential to destroy one of the most beautiful species on the planet, which is the honeybee. They are very special animals.
To get the syringe to go in.
When I get the money, I'm buying one of these for myself, this GPS. Love these things. Because it allows me to get completely lost out in the woods and find my way home. Because I've been into some spots where I was just, there was no way I knew where I was anymore, you know? So it helps. And then eventually I have to go find those colonies again. Some of them aren't so easy. Okay, where are we? It's a baiting station, so I put in honey, sugar, and water solution. In about 15-20 minutes or so, there'll be tons of them. There's a pretty high wild population density here. And if you compare that to the States, I mean, it's like comparing it to nothing. I mean, there's nothing in the States at all left, especially in a lot of the feral colonies are dying there. And so, you know, we deal with a lot of diseases and pests and things like that that it seems that the bees here are resistant to. There's a lot of bees right here. The colony might be pretty close, man. That'd be nice if we don't have to go all the way down in there. Bees use a spatial memory in order to find and return back to particular foraging sources. Once they are familiar with the location, then they could use that spatial memory to go back and forth from the colony. And when they do that, they pretty much take a direct route. And that's what the beeline is. You know, from this food, they're going to be going directly back and forth from the colony, so you could actually watch them fly in a very specific direction. So if you could follow it closely enough, it should lead you straight there. They seem to be forming a line right to the right of that tree. Now I lost the sound. It's coming from over there, huh? Let's try up this way. It's pretty loud there. Yeah, I found it, man. I tried this a bunch of times in Florida and I couldn't find them. I think a lot of those feral populations have died. Some people say it has to do with the varroa mites or whatnot. And then, again, at least the bees I know in the Eastern Cape are pretty resistant to varroa diseases and attacks. Again, that could have something to do with the genetic diversity in this area. I think some people are obsessed too much with excessive productivity of the colonies, like, oh, we need tons of honey and tons of propolis, things like that, as opposed to just having a healthy colony that will last for years and years, where you'd have to manage it very little. It seems to be more beneficial in the end and more cost-effective to manage a wild-caught colony. Yeah, just gonna take the GPS. I'll name this colony after you, huh?
It's wild.
No, it's not wild.
In a movie.
If it was wild, it wouldn't be standing there watching you.
Cattle is not wild. The wild cattle is buffalo.
Buffalo?
Yes, those are wild.
You want to do what?
The milk comes from the cow. You have to give the cow the milk. The milk comes from the cow.
Might be, you're right. That's the queen. That is, you're right, because she is the bigger one. And she does walk funnier.
Okay, can I explain to you a little bit about the queen? She lays sort of over 1,000 eggs every day. That is more than her own body weight in eggs every day. That's a lot of babies, huh?
That's a lot of babies.
Okie dokie. So she has to get fed more than her own body weight to produce those eggs.
Gosh.
She actually doesn't sit down and have a chocolate every now and then.
Now I really want to see her.
She's basically just an egg-laying machine. She also produces lots of what we call pheromones, which are little aromatic substances that affect the other bees. So she's a really busy lady. So we're sort of 2 centuries behind in our bees' resistance to this. So we'll see over time what will happen. As I say, the important thing is now to sort of just make sure that sanity prevails in the information which is going. Because of course there are a lot of rumor mongering happening. There are people that are making recommendations which will line their own pockets. And then of course we're concerned about the bees in the environment themselves, because bees were here long before we were here. They're actually endemic to the Cape. So we're concerned about what's happening to the bees in the environment and what's going to happen to our wild bee population. Supporting an organism artificially, if we can use that term, by constant supply of antibiotics, and we're talking about whatever animal it is in an agricultural production cycle, pampering animals, it has been called by our beekeepers, who are also vehemently against antibiotics. You carry on providing them with antibiotics, eventually they're going to be much more susceptible to organisms, causative organisms of diseases from outside. Alternatives are trying to manage your bees better.
This package came down from Tiens Engelbrecht in Douglas. He phoned me up and he said he was unhappy with what he was seeing with his bees in terms of what we think is AFB. In terms of what we're seeing in the country, it is unequivocally AFB. The sample comes from Tiens Engelbrecht, who's the biggest beekeeper in South Africa, runs about 10,000 hives. And this glove is giving me a hard time. I'll put another one on. Probably means it's going to spread. If it hasn't already, it will spread throughout the country and beyond our borders. That's very nice AFB. That's classic. That's absolutely classic AFB.
Yeah, no, I'm right. I'm busy rehiving a swarm, a monster swarm. Listen here. How's that? I put the phone right into the swarm now. We will catch up when I see you next, hopefully. Have a great day. Ciao. Very nice swarm, eh? My message to everybody as a beekeeper. Shit. You really keep throwing the questions at me today, Carlos. You think I really feel like I'm brain dead today when you ask me these questions. I haven't got an opinion on it right now. My message... Most of this world doesn't really understand about nature anymore because there's so little of it left. Hey, Carlos? There's so little nature around us, man. You live in a little square house and you have a little square garden if you're lucky, or a paved area because your parents couldn't be bothered to mow the lawn. There's not going to be places to keep bees eventually. There's not going to be much green space, and whatever green space there is, it's going to be for people to use for recreation. And you can't have recreation around the bees.
The moment you start getting losses, beekeepers start treating to protect their business. And that's the crucial point. We just do not know how bad the impact is going to be. I hope it's only 20%. People like Brendan Ashley Cooper are not treating. They are trying to simply say, let them die, let them die, let them die, we'll end up with a resistant population. And I subscribe and support Brendan absolutely in his approach. Brendan has already lost about 30% of his bees. Hopefully he will not see any significant losses from now on. But if suddenly, let us say in February, 50% of Brendan's remaining colonies all get sick and die, then Brendan will have no choice but to seriously rethink what he's doing and say, I can't lose another 50%. Then I'm down to only 30% of what I started with. I can't carry on beekeeping. I can't, my job, my life changes, cannot survive on that small percentage.
Ah, there's a queen. Ha! Lovely! When the queen kicks in, you just have this like eggs. Whole frame of eggs. That's fantastic.
Mm-hmm.